introducing yourself. Thanks, Florence, tuning in from Uganda. Jean, based from Rwanda. Thank you so much. Welcome for those of us who are just joining us today. This is our first webinar of the year, and we really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to join this webinar. Thank you, Beatrice from Kenya, for introducing yourself. I'd like to encourage more of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. I'm sure a lot of you have just joined, and I think we are good to begin soon. Thank you so much for your patience. So I'd like to start by going through the agenda for today. So today we'll start with an introduction of our panelists today, and then we will talk about comparing PCI to various international standards, followed by discussing PCI standards and compliance, understanding 6 principles and 12 requirements for PCI, assessing cybersecurity readiness, building a cybersecurity strategy using PCI DSS standards, incident response and recovery, PCI tools, collaboration, and best practices, and we'll end with a Q&A session. So I'd like to encourage all of you to send in your questions through the Q&A tab, specifically the Q&A tab and not the chat, so then we can organize all your questions accordingly. And we also have a few panelists available to answer your questions live during the webinar, and the rest of your questions will be answered towards the end. And I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. So our first panelist is Sandeep Khopre. He is a regional CEO of BDO East Africa. Sandeep started his consulting career over 19 years ago in area of strategic services. He also successfully worked in diverse areas such as ERP implementation, development, consulting, and marketing, thereby progressing to become a partner of the firm. Prior to BDO, he worked in the industry at several senior positions for 8 years, focusing on strategic planning, designing, and implementation of emerging technology solutions, marketing, operations, and other projects. Sandeep has traveled to more than 55 countries of varying duration of time and is geared to handle local, regional, and international challenges. He holds a Bachelor's of Commerce and Economics, specialized in development economics from Osmania University in India, and an MBA at ESSEC University in Paris. He's also a certified project manager professional and a certified balanced scorecard professional from Palladium Institute in America. Thank you for joining us today, Sandeep. Our next panelist is Paul Misharia. He's a manager in technology advisory and business intelligence services of BDO East Africa's office in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Rwanda. He has over 11 years of experience and has been working in IT consulting profession and is experienced at providing IT consultancy services. He has extensive experience in governance and maintenance of information, protection of information assets, and information systems. He's a technology graduate from the University of Nairobi after pursuing a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Information Systems. He is also CISA and CCP AWS Cloud certified. He's also pursuing a Master's of Science in Informational Science, Security and Digital Forensics from the University of East London. And prior to joining BDO in 2022, Paul worked with PKF and RSM for 9 years, and he has worked with major firms across East Africa to enable value and decision-making from data to solve business challenges. So our next presenter is Joseph Wanzanje. He is an assistant manager in risk advisory, internal audit, and forensics with BDO in East Africa. He's an audit assurance, risk management, and internal audit and governance professional with over 7 years demonstrated experience in several industries, including NGOs, FMCG companies, logistics, manufacturing, and banks, and financial services. He has a strong track record in managing critical and high-level internal audit and forensic investigations and audits. And he's also highly skilled in developing of internal controls, development risk management frameworks, and internal audit programs, and analysis of suspect computers. And he has an MBA in finance from JKUAT and a BCommerce in finance from KCA University. And prior to joining BDO, he worked with RSM East Africa and ESL Group. And now I'd like to hand it over to Sandeep to kick off this webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Meha, and thanks to all the attendees for attending this webinar today. Just before we start off on the webinar and the others, the technical people present, I just wanted to give you an idea about who we are. BDO on a global basis, we are one of the largest professional services firm. We have a turnover of $14 billion. We are present in 166 odd countries with more than 115,000 employees. BDO East Africa, a larger BDO East Africa, is in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ethiopia, with new offices coming up in Burundi and DR Congo. And when I say larger East Africa, we also have offices in Mauritius, Madagascar, and Seychelles. Together, if we take this entire group of firms, we have 1,300 professionals working for us. So BDO's seamless global approach allows us to serve clients through a central point of contact. So if anybody actually deals with us, has a single point of contact, and we would be able to bring relevant experience across borders. So as I said, we have 1,300 professionals in so many other countries, so it really doesn't matter where they are sitting, they would be able to provide good services to yourselves. Obviously, when it comes to our services, we provide audit and assurance services, outsourcing services, which means we can provide payroll, accounting services, tax services, both in terms of compliance and advisory services, including appearing at tax appeals tribunals. And in advisory services, we provide risk advisory services, technology advisory services, development advisory services, as well as corporate finance and transaction advisory, mergers and acquisitions, due diligences, and valuations. When it comes to the IT cybersecurity webinar series, this is, as you can see, the second in this particular series. These are cutting-edge webinars on IT cybersecurity topics aimed at helping organizations like yourselves to fortify their defenses against cyber threats and leverage technology for business growth. These seminars are led by renowned experts and industry professionals. BDO East Africa webinars offer practical insights. So these are not just theoretical concepts. They give you proactive strategies and actionable advice to navigate through the complex landscape of IT security and maximize the potential of technology-enabled business processes. As we all know, technology has become an integral part of our daily lives, and the importance of cybersecurity cannot be overstated. With the exponential growth of digital platforms and the increasing sophistication of cyber threats, individuals and organizations must prioritize their cybersecurity measures. We will explore the significance of cybersecurity in the digital age and highlight the key reasons why it should be a top priority for everyone. So with that as the background, I hand it over to Joseph. Joseph, can you take it over from here?
Thank you, Sandeep. So let's embark on a journey to explore the PCI compliance, proactive cybersecurity management. We will look at the importance of entrenching cybersecurity into your risk management practices, and we'll also cover in some detail the 12 requirements of the PCI and the 6 principles of PCI DSS. We'll also provide insights into levels of compliance, merchant levels, and e-service provider requirements. And finally, we'll summarize and take some questions at the end. So, but first, we need to understand what we mean by PCI. So, what is PCI? So, PCI or the payment card industry, PCI or the payment card industry data security standard, the PCI DSS. It is a set of security standards that are designed to ensure that all companies that accept, process, store, and transmit credit data information maintain a secure environment. So the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, which was launched on sometime in September 2006, it was launched to manage the ongoing evaluation of the payment card industry, which came up with the standards and the guidelines on improving the payment account security throughout the transaction process. So the PCI DSS is administered and managed by the PCI SSC as an independent body that was created by the major payment card brands like Visa, the MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and JCB. So it is important to know that the payment brands that acquires are responsible for enforcing compliance, not the PCI Council. So according to 23 edition of the Verizon's data breach investigations report, payment card data was compromised in the 35% of breaches in 2022. It is also a high value target. For example, in the hospitality industry, credit card data was the target of 41% of the cyber attacks, according to the 2023 DBIR. So there's various standards for PCI. We have the PCI PTS, which is the PIN transaction security. So this mainly applies to manufacturers of the card readers and the PDQs, which process the credit cards. We have the PCI PADSS. Again, this is a PCI payment application data security standard, specifically for software vendors that develop the point of sale, the POS applications to accept credit card payments. When payment application data security standard, the PADSS 3.2 version expired at the end of 22 October. So the current one is the one for manufacturers, the PCI DSS, which technically is a general compliance standard that applies to any business that processes, stores, or transmits credit card data. It covers technical and operational systems components included in or connected to cardholder data. So this is the most common standard, which again today is the one that we're going to concentrate on. So we'll discuss the evolution of PCI from version 1.0 to version 4.0 in the slides that follow. So what does it mean to be PCI compliant and PCI certified? So we're going to look at the difference between the two. So payment and data security has never been more important, especially with the global changes in the consumer behavior as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So according to the Visa's recent report on 2021, payment security features are an e-commerce purchasing trend continue to dominate the industry. Retailers are adapting to ensure that consumer data is protected. So some of these adjustments include the merchants updating fraud prevention strategies, implementing modernized payment infrastructure, and government increasing authentication measures. So this brings up on the important topic within the payment security space around PCI certification. So in short, PCI certification verifies that an organization contains the technical requirements which protect and secure payment card data during processing, handling, storage, and transmission. So according to PCI SSC, following PCI security standards is just a good business as they help ensure healthy and trustworthy payment card transactions for the hundreds of millions of people worldwide that cards use every day. So when an organization is PCI compliant, this means that they have taken steps to protect cardholder by following the guidelines set by the PCI SSC. So to become compliant, organizations fill out a self-assessment questionnaire to ensure that they're complying with the PCI guidelines. On the other hand, PCI certification is a rigorous process involving a comprehensive audit by a qualified security assessor. During this process, the qualified security assessor reviews all the areas of your business related to cardholder data, checks to ensure that the proper security measures are in place to protect customer information. So to become PCI certified, the quality security assessor reviews how your software is developed, how your developers are trained, as well as the technical procedures and controls of your software. So while the self-assessment questionnaire and the PCI certification processes are similar, the main difference is that To become PCI certified, you have the QSA providing proof of your software processes, whereas for PCI compliant organizations, your claims have not been proven. So I want us to move on why our webinar is focused on the PCI compliance. So our focus on the PCI compliance or the payment card industry data security standard is a set of security standards designed to ensure that all companies that accept, process, store, or transmit credit card information maintains a secure environment. So PCI focuses on 6 principles. We have the first one, the secure network. We have the data protection. We have the risk management, which maintains the secure systems by targeting vulnerabilities. We have access control. We have monitoring, and we have maintenance. So we'll discuss this in detail in the next slides. So the question is, who must comply with the PCI DSS? All businesses that store, process, or transmit payment card holder data must be PCI compliant. So it also applies to all merchants and service providers that process, transmit, or store card holder data must comply with the PCI DSS. So when I say merchants are people who accept debit or credit card payments for goods or services. Note that the PCI DSS applies to merchants even if they have subcontracted their payment card processing to a third party. Whereas when we say a service provider, these are people who are directly involved in processing, storing, or transmitting card holder data on behalf of another entity. So these are business entities such as yourselves, who are not a payment brand directly involved in the processing, storage, or transmission of card holder data on behalf of other entity. So this includes companies that provide services that control or could impact the security of data of individuals. So some organizations can be both a merchant and a service provider. For instance, an organization that provides data processing services for other merchants will also be a merchant if it accepts card payments. So it is important to note that PCI DSS is a standard and not a law, and is enforced through contracts between merchants, acquiring banks that process payment card transactions, and the payment brands. So each payment brand can define an acquiring bank for PCI DSS compliance violations. In turn, acquiring banks can withdraw the ability to accept card payments from non-compliant merchants. So compliance obligations for merchants also increase significantly in the event of a breach. So moreover, cardholder data breach or theft is also a breach of the EU GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. The data breaches risk heavy penalties under the regulation, which sometimes can go up to 20 million pounds or 4% of annual global turnover, whichever is great. So I want us to compare the standards for cybersecurity, the cybersecurity management. Currently, we have various industries having different standards, which are tailored for the business environment they're operating. So there's no one fit for all. Every industry has a different standard that they incorporate. So the several information security standards exist, each serving specific purposes and industries. For example, we have the PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This one focuses most primarily at the entities handling credit card transactions. Its mandate is required for organizations that store, process, or transmit cardholder data. The main objective is data protections, just focuses on securing and protecting cardholder data throughout the payment card transaction process. In terms of compliance, it requires periodic validation of compliance, often through self-assessment or external assessment by a qualified security assessor. In terms of non-compliance to it, non-compliance may result in fines and restrictions on card processing. Then the second one is ISO 27001, the Information Security Management System. This one is a target industry, is applicable to organizations across all industries, not limited to payment card transactions. That's why you find most organizations they have incorporated this standard in their companies, because it cuts across all the industries. The main objective just aims to establish, implement, maintain and continually improve an information security management system. An organization can seek ISO certification through external certification bodies that are there in the market. We have NIST, which is a cybersecurity framework. It's generally and applicable in all sectors, both public and private, just like ISO. It focuses mostly on identifying, protecting, detecting, responding to, and recovering from cybersecurity incidents. Then we have HIPAA. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It mostly targets the healthcare industry, handling protected healthcare information. So its objective just focuses to protect the patient data protection, which just focuses on safeguarding the privacy and the security of patient information. Then we have the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. Again, this applies to organizations processing personal data of the European Union residents. It's only applicable to organizations that work with the European Union. The objective is the same as data privacy, just focuses on protecting individuals' privacy and giving them control over their personal data. Then finally, we have CIS. CIS, a Control Center for Internal Security. Again, its target industry is general and applicable across various industries. It is more on cyber defense. It provides a set of best practices for securing in organization IT environment. No. So I want to compare the different standards by cybersecurity management. So it is important to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all standard. There are key differences and considerations among various standards before an organization decides in which one to implement. So the key difference and considerations, for example, if we look at PCI DSS and ISO, PCI DSS is industry-specific. It focuses on payment card transactions, while ISO is broad and is applicable to all organizations in any industry. PCI DSS requires compliance validation, but certification is not mandatory. Whereas ISO 27001, it allows for certification, demonstrating adherence to the international standards. In terms of risk management, ISO 27001 and NIST Cybersecurity Framework, they both emphasize on a comprehensive approach to risk management, whereas PCI DSS includes risk management, but it is more prescriptive in certain areas. So in terms of things like regulation, things like HIPAA and GDPR, they have legal implications with penalties for non-compliance. In terms of global adaptability, ISO 27001, NIST, and CIS controls, they are recognized globally, whereas PCI DSS, HIPAA, and GDPR have more regional or industry-specific focuses. So organizations often choose a combination of standards based on their industry, regulatory requirements, and specific security needs. So the selection depends on the nature of the data they handle, their business processes, and the legal and regulation landscape in which they operate. So every organization can decide on which one to incorporate in the organization. So if we were to compare comparing different standards with so you want to compare different standards with different standards for cybersecurity management. Go back twice. Yes. So okay. So for passwords, it is important to. So there's a different password standards for cybersecurity for every standard. For example, for less complex organizations, ISACA's COBIT methodology would suit the organization's coverage. However, for military intelligence apparatus, the NIS 853 becomes a requirement as it encompasses far complex controls to safeguard data. So, for example, ISACA COBIT, the ISACA Information Security Audit and Control Association, PCI DSS, NIST, they provide frameworks and standards for various aspects, including password management. So, for example, ISACA provides COBIT for information technologies, which is widely used for governance and IT. So, for example, for NIST and ISACA, they have a weaker coverage in terms of passwords. PCI DSS and ISO, they have a moderate coverage, whereas in NIST 853, they have a robust coverage where you can find, for example, you can have maybe 5-letter password made of numbers and letters, whereas for NIST 853 with the robust coverage, they might require you to have 12 characters that have numbers, combination of numbers, combination of letters, combination of capitals or small letters. All these standards have a very different level of passwords, and this helps them to be more secure, to help them from cyber attacks. So it's comparing between the standards for ISO 2700. So the various frameworks have a convergence. So like PCI DSS and ISO, they're both standards designed to enhance information security, but they have different scopes, objectives, and focus areas. So while both PCI DSS and ISO 27001 address information security, PCI DSS is more industry specific with a focus on protecting cardholder data, while ISO is broader standard applicable to organizations of all types, it emphasizes more on a comprehensive approach to information security management. So organizations often choose to implement both standards, with the PCI DSS addressing the specific payment card related concerns, whereas ISO 27001 it provides a broader framework for information security management. So now it begs us down to a question why our webinar is focused on the PCI DSS compliance. Our webinar is focused on this because it is crucial in safeguarding sensitive customer information and preventing data breaches in the payment card industry. So according to the Verizon Payment Security Report of 2022, there have been a notable progress in PCI DSS compliance rates over the years. So the report highlights that 43.4% of assessed organizations maintained full compliance in 2020 compared to a lower of 27.9% observed in 2019. So to fully grasp the significance of PCI DSS compliance, it is essential to understand the benefits of PCI DSS compliance, and we highlight this in today's webinar. So PCI DSS compliance is important for businesses as it ensures the protection of cardholder data, reduces the risk of data breaches, and safeguards the business reputation. So by implementing PCI DSS requirements, businesses can build customer trust and confidence, leading to increased conversion rates and customer loyalty. PCI compliance has more benefits like the enhanced data security, which it is heightened the data security level. So by implementing the necessary security measures, organizations can protect themselves against data breaches and maintain the confidentiality of sensitive customer information. So this benefit alone, it is instrumental in establishing trust and credibility among customers. The second benefit, you have the increased customer trust. So PCI DSS compliance is a way for businesses to demonstrate their commitment. By adhering to this standard, organizations can instill confidence in their customers, building trust and loyalty. So customers are more likely to engage with businesses prioritizing data security, especially in an era where data breaches are prevalent. Another benefit is the avoidance of penalties and legal issues. So complying with PCI DSS standards ensures that organizations meet the regulatory requirements, thus avoiding penalties and legal consequences. Failure to comply can result to hefty fines, damage to reputation, and even lawsuits. So organizations minimize the risk of financial losses and legal complications by adhering to the standard. And we all know that all organizations will want to adhere to all standards so that we don't undertake the financial losses and we maintain the trust with our customers. So another benefit is operational efficiency. So with the PCI DSS compliance, it promotes operational efficiency by streamlining payment processes, by implementing secure systems and protocols. Businesses can minimize the risk of fraud and unauthorized transactions. So this not only protects organizations, but also ensures smoother and more efficient operations, benefiting both the business and its customers. Lastly, we have the competitive advantage. So PCI DSS compliance can provide a significant competitive advantage. Customers increasingly value data security and privacy, and organizations that prioritize and communicate their compliance status. can attract customers who prioritize this aspect. So additionally, being the PCI DSS compliant differentiates businesses from non-compliant competitors. It positions them as a trustworthy and responsible stewards of customer data. So without further ado, I will hand over to Paul Macharia to take us through what exactly is PCI and the various aspects of compliance. Thank you. Paul, over to you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just pick off from where my colleague Joseph left off. Right. So before we embark on understanding PCI compliance, the first thing is to understand where PCI came from. And the only way to do that is to first go back in time to understand exactly what happened for PCI to come alive. So the payment card industry standards basically was started in the early 1999 era. This is during the internet era, when internet became so prevalent within the world, and everyone started looking at making it simpler to get access to your money in your bank accounts by now implementing internet banking. Consequently, in 2001, other card brands like Visa, MasterCard started to realize that with the opening up of the internet, it increased the value of fraud and transactions that were being fraudulent, especially with regards to transactions which are being transacted from one to another. And that now gave the rise to PCI DSS 1.0. This was in December of 2004. The first company to develop this was Visa. So other companies and other brands within the globe struggled a lot to keep up with the standards that Visa had set. Reason being is because Visa focused on the North American market and did not consider the global market. So in 2006, due to this disparity between North American markets and the rest of the globe, the PCI Council was formed. And that's when they released PCI DSS version 1.1. Over the years, came mobile banking, came P2P business transactions, B2C, merchants, etc. And I'll fast forward you to April of 2015, when there was a short-term release of PCI 3.1, which took into account the digital age, the Internet of Things, the use of portable devices. With time, PCI continued to improve on the standard, and in March of 2022, they introduced PCI 4.0, which is now the gold standard, which is currently being adopted and implemented. And in the next 2 months, basically in March 2024, PCI 3.2.1 will be formally retired and will be fully replaced by 4.0, which now covers the 6 principles and the 12 requirements of PCI compliance. Going forward from 2025 March, which is on the dawn of the next year, there will be new requirements that will be developed by merchants and service providers for their requirements to be able to adopt the PCI standard and retain it within the compliant, the side of being fully certified. So we spoke about the 6 principles of PCI DSS. Now we need to look at them in detail. So PCI really looks into 6 major principles. The first one is building and maintaining a secure network. The objective of this is to maintain a firewall configuration which now secures the network itself and not to use the supplied default settings that come with all the applications that we buy. The second principle is ensuring protection of cardholder data. And in this case, the principle focuses on encryption as a principle for by default. So the minimum encryption standard that has been set for PCI DSS is the AES 256 encryption standard. And for you to either become compliant or even certified, you must ensure that all your systems have AES 256 and above encryption. Number 3 is you need to maintain a vulnerability management program, which ideally is using not using the default antivirus that comes with your PC. So let's say, for example, you buy a Windows PC, comes with Windows Defender. Before Windows 11, Windows Defender had been considered as a fast antivirus system. And therefore, there was a lot of vulnerabilities that came from other sources, Linux-based systems, Mac OS systems, and they were loaded on Windows versions and vice versa. The 4th principle is to ensure that you implement strong access features, because the objective of this is to restrict access to only the limited users who are allowed to basically go through the data itself, because the PCI standard is purely for protecting data. So once you implement a strong access control method, the 5th one is to ensure regular monitoring and test networks. Basically to track and monitor all access to network resources, and also to regularly test security systems throughout the process of your certification. Right. So once we're done with principles of PCI DSS, we need to look at the second most valuable principle, which is the 12 requirements of PCI DSS programs. So with PCI came the requirement to bring in 12 key requirements to marry with the 6 principles that have been implemented. And these are to ensure that any governing body who will use PCI DSS 4.0 from the start of March 31, 2025 onwards. And these are the requirements that go into 4.0. So requirement number 1 is to ensure that you install and maintain network security controls. Today, many transactions happen virtually through the internet and e-commerce. And without proper security, authorization and users can gain access to payment system networks. And the reason why requirement 1 was implemented is to address the issue of requiring businesses to maintain secure network with implementation of firewalls. The second requirement is to apply secure configurations for all system components. Oftentimes, network-defined devices and equipment
come with pre-configured default passwords and settings. In most cases, if you procure a firewall today or a new router, the username will always be admin and the password will always be password123. So this particular requirement ensures that default passwords and settings for devices, especially those that are connected to the network, are safeguarded to make it harder for hackers to gain access to those devices, ideally by ensuring that you change the pre-configured default password and settings. Requirement number 3 is to ensure that you protect all the stored account data. So because PCI DSS focuses a lot on cardholder data, there are certain categories of data that PCI allows you to store and others that they do not allow you to store, especially once the transaction has passed. The personal account numbers, cardholder account names, and expiry dates for those particular accounts are some of the details you can store even post the transaction. But what is not allowed is the storage of the magnetic strip data, the pins, and the CVVs. The CVVs are the 3-digit codes and sometimes 4-digit codes that appear on the back of your card just along your magnetic strip. Requirement number 4 is to ensure that you protect all that data that you have collected, the ones that are allowed. And this now touches on strong encryption technology to encrypt the data from unauthorized users. And in this case, the PCI standard states that businesses should never send unprotected PAN to end user messaging, such as email, instant messages, SMS, and chat. And this is part of the checklist. Requirement number 5 ensures that all organizations seeking PCI compliance or PCI certification protect all systems by maintaining and developing secure systems and applications. So this includes installing antivirus systems on all platforms and all services, ensuring that an antivirus software that has been installed cannot be altered or deleted or the policies be changed, and to ensure automation of this particular antivirus product to ensure that it's automatically scanning, automatically archiving, and flagging any and peculiar traffic. Requirement number 6 is to use and frequently update an antivirus software. And this touches a lot on number 5. Requirement number 7 is to restrict access to all system components and cardholder data by business need to know basis. So ideally, the standard prescribes that authorization should be granted only on a need to know basis, and you should not be able to display information throughout a transaction cycle that relates to something like a cardholder information or the CVV. If you're just transacting the amount, you just should broadcast the amount. Requirement number 8 is to identify user and authenticate systems access to these components. PCI also requires businesses to assign unique IDs to each employee with access to any of the system components, so as to allow businesses to keep a history of users and the access that they managed to access within the period of a transaction. So requirement number 8 in PCI requires that multi-factor authentication and password encryption be implemented as a must. If you recall during Joseph's presentation, ISACA-based standard was considered to be of a weaker coverage because it only covers the types of passwords and the standard of a password that you should be able to develop. It does not take into account multi-factor authentication. Whereas PCI ensures that you have to have multiple points where you access these accounts. And furthermore, the password policies that have also been adopted by ISACA. Requirement number 10 is to ensure that you log and monitor all access to system components and cardholder data. And this focuses on log generation and being able to track actions back to an individual account. Requirement number 11 is to ensure that you test the security systems and processes regularly, and especially the network. And this is where they touch on the importance of vulnerability scanning and annual penetration testing as a requirement by default.
Requirement number 12 is to support the information security within the organization by developing policies and programs which are well documented. And this involves implementing an incident response plan, conducting an annual risk program, creating a technology usage policy, defining employee information, and ensuring that specific responsibilities for protecting cardholder data have been assigned. Now that we have grasped the 12 requirements of PCI, we now could delve deeper into understanding the various levels and compliance levels. So PCI is divided into two. So there's a merchant side and there's also the service provider side. So under the merchant side, there are 4 levels, and they are grouped in this case to fall in one of the 4 various brackets based on transactions value and the count of transactions within a particular calendar year. So merchant level 1, regardless of the acceptance channel, it means that you're processing over 6 million transactions per year. Any merchant that Visa at its own discretion determines should meet the level 1 merchant requirements must ensure that an internal audit is done at least once a year. Merchant level 2 is a lower standard, which means covers the coverage between 1 million to 6 million transactions per year, regardless of any acceptance channel. And whereas this is a slightly lower standard, this also requires anyone who's merchant level 2 to perform annual self-assessment questionnaires and quarterly PCI scans. Merchant level 3 goes a bit lower and goes between 20,000 transactions to 1 million Visa transactions or e-commerce transactions in a year, and also requires the merchant to perform yearly self-assessment questionnaires and also submit quarterly PCI scans. Level 4 goes now below transactions 20K in a year, regardless again of the acceptance channel. And any merchant who is found to have breached or resulted in an account data compromise may be escalated to a higher validation level. So you can start off as merchant level 4 because you probably fall between 20,000, 0 to 20,000 transactions per year. Then at this case, you suffer a breach or a significant data breach. The PCI enforcers, these are the Visas, the merchant, the MasterCards, the JBCs, they can then push you up to level 1 by default and ensure that you now conduct the higher standard, which means you will then have to issue an annual report, an annual SAQ, which is a self-assessment questionnaire, and also now frequent PCI scans. On to service providers, it limits only to 2. And for service providers, just like merchants, they are broken down into compliance levels based on the cardholder data transaction amount they can impact or the requirements of their customers. So level 1 service providers basically are those who store, process, transmit, and have an impact of more than 300,000 card transactions per year. So similar to level 1 on the merchant side, level 1 service providers must undergo an annual credit audit led by a QSA. And once that is completed, an ROC has to be issued, basically a return on the concept. Level 2 service providers are those who just store, transmit, or have an impact of fewer than 300,000 card transactions per year. And again, these ones have to submit an self-assessment questionnaire, level D, and also ensure that they conduct penetration testing on a quarterly basis by an approved scanner. The diagram you see on your screen is an example on how PCI Security Council checklist determines the type of questionnaire that you now are forced to take and the route that you choose if you're a service provider or a merchant, and the classification between the various categories. So the first thing you can do is to determine your PCI compliance is by checking your card transaction volume for the last 2 weeks. And
You can get this from any bank or any of your systems that you've implemented. If you have trouble accessing such transaction volume, you would want to now then check on your compliance level before you can even contact the payment brand itself, and you can then request your compliance. So there are various levels. SEQD applies mostly to service providers, whereas SEQA, B, BIP, C, CVT, and D mostly apply across the various levels of merchants. There's no one way of determining that I fall in level 2 or level 1 without having to first undertake the environment testing based on the checklist. So once the PCI 4.0 kicks in March this year, it has added an additional threshold of requirements prior to you being admitted into either level 1 or level 4 merchant or a level 1 and / level 2 service provider. Right. So now that we've taken time to understand the various levels of PCI, it is important to unpack now the cyber readiness and the resilience, especially with regards to cybersecurity. So Ludmila Morozova-Bas stated, and I quote, "The stellar evolution of cybersecurity has begun, and the evolutionary process of the stars depend upon their initial mass. The evolutionary process of cybersecurity will depend upon the hyperconvergence of cyber dependencies, people, processes, and technology. So it has to be a convergence of the four." You may ask yourself, why be proactive? I have some statistics from the National Cyber and Computer Incident Response Team of Kenya, which is part of the Communications Authority of Kenya, which shows that whereas there was an 11% drop in the total of number of cybersecurities detected, the number still is very high. It's still 123 million cyber threats that were detected in Q3. Within the same period, there was a steep decline in the number of cyber threat advisories which were issued. And this translates to 5.5 million threat advisories that were issued within the same period. Previously, this was 10 million, and the 48% decrease shows that ideally most organizations are now starting to basically implement stronger controls into their frameworks, assisted by standards such as PCI. And for that, let's just summarize some of the common threats and vulnerabilities that affect the payment card industry. So one of the major threats to the cybersecurity environment are phishing attacks, where cybersecurities use deceptive emails and websites to trick individuals into revealing some sensitive information. And this include login details and also card details. There's also malware and point of sale intrusion. So malware, which stands for malicious software, can also be installed onto a point of sale and therefore compromise the security of the payment channel. There's also insider threats, and this is usually the biggest, which focuses on employees or even trusted individuals within an organization that may intentionally or even unintentionally compromise cardholder data, either for their financial gain or just due to sheer negligence. Within the PCI framework, you'd find a lot of card scheming, and card scheming is a type of cybercrime where criminals install a scheming device on an ATM or even on a payment terminal, which then captures the magnetic stripe data and then makes a mirror copy of that particular card. With time, most of the banks, even locally and internationally, have now moved away from the traditional magnetic strip to now a pin and chip platform. And this is one of the PCI 3.2.1 revelations that came in between 2014 and 2016. Another type of attack is the distributed denial of service attack,
where you just overwhelm a system with a lot of network traffic, and therefore just enabling unauthorized access to cardholder data during all that chaos. Ransomware is the last but not least, where it's malicious software that encrypts the system files, and then the hacker demands for payment for decryption. If the payment is not made, then in this case, the data remains inaccessible. But if someone has the time, they can then buy this data off the black market and start now decrypting the ransomware. And then at the end of it all, gain access to your data. Some of the common vulnerabilities that are noted within PCI framework is the use of weak authentication and access controls, basically poorly managed access to various cardholder data and systems. The lack of encrypted data transmission protocols like SFTP and SFTP, which is a secure file transfer protocol. Having outdated software and poor patching mechanisms within the organization, and this includes on the point of sale terminals, the network devices, the routers, etc. There's the lack of security awareness training. As we had mentioned, employees and users are usually the weakest link, and users may be unaware of security best practices and they may fall victim to engineering attacks and reveal personal data. There's also the risk of third parties, where business especially those who rely on third-party service providers, where that third-party service provider has not complied to the various standards. And then the privacy of the data that you hold, especially cardholder data, is then compromised not from your end, but from your third party. Another vulnerability is the inadequate incident response plan, where you now then lack an incident response plan in the event of a breach, which then causes within that chaos, the dropping of actual procedures which would safeguard the data and open up even more procedures within the organizations, or maybe more areas of access to the hackers or to the malicious actors, and they gain more and more information. The last but not least is also the storage of unnecessary data, and this is something that GDPR, the Kenya Data Protection Act of 2019, and the regional acts that have been developed even both within Africa and the world, where it was noted that people actually store a lot of unnecessary data, and storing this data on a card holder, let's say PO box, this is a postal address, then an email address, a phone number, the first, second, and third name, an ID number, all that within one particular database, exposes this data to a lot of vulnerabilities, ideally. And if someone would get access to this data, then they can impersonate that person on a 100% basis, because they have a lot of information about the card holder. How to counter against this? You need to perform regular security assessments. Basically, this helps identify such vulnerabilities and then also helps you prioritize the remediation efforts. You need to conduct a lot of employee awareness and training, because the employee, if well trained, becomes your first line of defense against a cyber attack. You need to actually segregate and segment your networks into distinct zones based on roles, responsibilities, data sensitivity, etc. And this can limit the impact of potential breaches and unauthorized access. By default, PCI DSS basically requires you to implement multi-factor authentication by default across all systems, and not the single sign-on method that is mostly preferred by other organizations. And implementing MFA not only adds an additional layer of security by requiring the users to provide multiple forms of verification before accessing the sensitive data, it also then creates the second layer on top of the employee layer. By implementing these simple strategies, companies are able to now design a concrete incident response plan, which, if triggered in the event of a breach, would assist in safeguarding a lot of cardholder information. So what goes into an incident response or into a recovery? The first bit is having a cybersecurity incident response plan, which is also known as a CSIRP. This helps security teams to address active cyber incidents and the ones that are actually ongoing. We also need a business continuity plan. So because during an attack or when a cyber attack is ongoing, it is impossible for you to run business as usual. So you really need to have a business continuity plan, which shows or gives the guidelines on how to continue the operations during and after this particular disruption. The disaster recovery plan is just a pathway to return back to normal procedures following a major incident. In this case, would be a cyber attack. There are various stages of developing a cybersecurity incident response plan, and it just runs through preparation, which looks at security policies, incident communication streams, and also training. Then there's the identification bit, which then looks at the 4 Ws and the 1 H. In this case is the who, what, where, why, and how. Once you have identified all the various cybersecurity incidences that your organization can face, you then go into the containment stage. So while you're actually undergoing a cyber attack, there are 2 types of containment. So there's a short-term containment, which is basically to prevent further damage to the network at the time. And then there's also now the long-term containment, which is now more strategic containment solutions that replace the quick fixes that you exercised in step 1. Phase 4 is eradication, which means you disable all the infected systems, you scan any infected networks, and then you ensure that all the vulnerabilities that caused the initial breach have been addressed, and now you have brought back sanitized backups into the live environment. Phase 5 is recovery, and this is to return just normal systems to the normal state just before the pre-compromisation or the pre-compromised state, what we call the PCS. Last but not least, it's very important to document the lessons learned. So at this phase, all the response teams should implement any of the incident documentation that they have been constructing during the attack. And once completed, this documentation should be able to assist stakeholders, shareholders, and anyone within the organization to understand what happened and prepare better for the next time, because it doesn't mean that you won't be attacked again. So how do we then align proactive measures of security with PCI compliance? So you would recall that we had 6 goals of and the 6 principles of PCI DSS tagged along with the 12 requirements. So basically, for you to be able to align your goals with your requirements of the PCI standard. For example, if you were to protect cardholder data, you have to implement encryption. You have to implement privatized networks and segregation of your networks from the private staff and also from the external parties. You need to also implement strong access measures, such as restricting cardholder data to just the business need to know, and restricting physical access to server rooms where cardholder data is stored. But how do you do this? The first step is to identify and prioritize all your assets. You need to look at all your assets within the organization, and you need to involve all the stakeholders within the various departments. Software, hardware, data, end users, policies, information flow, network topology, physical security, environmental security, all these areas need to be looked into. And asset prioritization is then simplified with a simple risk matrix, which indicates what are the critical risks and what are the most likely to negatively impact your security posture. Is to identify now the cyber threats that you may face. And this is limited, not limited to rather, the natural disasters such as floods, hurricanes, earthquakes. It has been raining a lot recently here in Kenya and in Nairobi. So floods are not inevitable. There are also adversarial threats. In this case, these are third-party vendors, trusted insiders, privileged insiders, and even the established hacker collectives. So once you get onto their radar, they then now want to get that data. There's a lot of focus on human error. So basically, you have to ask yourself, are you holding any systems that contain a lot of sensitive information, especially cardholder data? And you should subject such systems to higher levels of security compared to other servers and other systems which do not have sensitive data. Last but not least is to check on your system failure and your readiness for system failure. Do you have high quality equipment, or do you just replace equipment with used equipment? You need to ensure that if you're holding personal data, you really need to be ahead of the technology. You also need to have very good support, especially for hardware and software, which is procured third party. Three is to perform VAPTs. So the purposes of VAPTs is purely to identify the vulnerabilities within your organization and your networks, reduce the software-based vulnerabilities, and also identify the attack surface vectors or the attack surface monitoring. Once you've performed your VAPT, you need then to document all your existing controls and also analyze which controls need to be phased out or which ones need to be improved. So there are two types of controls: preventive controls, which basically stop attacks. And these are examples such as encryption, firewalls, antivirus, etc. But then there are also the detective controls, which try to discover an attack even before it has actually occurred, or even during the attack, such as continuous data exposure detection. After that, you need to document all those results in a risk assessment report, which basically is a quarterly, by PCI standard, it is a quarterly report. So as you work through this process, you'll understand what infrastructure your company operates, what is your most valuable data, how you can better operate in a secure environment, and your business can thrive even in the event of a disaster or even of an attack. So let us look at some of the companies that have successfully implemented proactive cybersecurity and PCI compliance. So if you look at the screen, you'll notice some logos which you might identify with, and I'll just go through some of them. It is important to note that whereas we have certain information that is publicly available, some of the cybersecurity practices of these organizations are not publicly disclosed, especially because of security reasons. There have been instances where companies have successfully managed both proactive cybersecurity and PCI compliance. And a good example is AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. This is a cloud service provider, which has implemented a lot of robust security measures, both security of the cloud and security in the cloud. It is important to note that security of the cloud is AWS's responsibility, but security in the cloud, basically your applications and the infrastructure that you're running, that is your responsibility. Netflix, which is an online streaming service, and this is a subscription-based service. So before you onboard onto Netflix, there's a lot of card holder information that you give. So basically, you give your card name, you give your CVV, and also your expiry date of that particular card. So if someone wants to hack into Netflix's database today, it's not even the subscriptions or the active subscriptions that would help that person. It is the amount of card data that they would derive from the system itself. So the company has adhered to PCI DSS requirements. On top of that, other standards such as ISO and NIST on the higher baseline 853. There is PayPal, which is an online payment platform for exchanging money line outside the banks, and this is more or less a service provider and not a merchant. So they have a strong focus on security and a lot of compliance. And PayPal is fully PCI DSS compliant and PCI 3.2.1 certified. They have implemented certain controls such as encryption through the transaction, ensuring multi-factor authentication during logins and logouts, and ensuring that there's a lot of regular security assessments and a lot of training awareness to their customers, either through emails, or through push notifications while you're on the app. Some of you may be aware or may be familiar with Square. So Square is a financial services company and a mobile payment company that is known for its point of sale solutions. And they offer the POSs and a lot of PDQs that you find that are compatible with Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover platforms. Microsoft Azure is another one that we cannot leave behind, as well as Google, for those who are Google One and not the free version of Google. Both of them are cloud computing platforms, which provide services that can be used to build and host applications. And in this case, they handle a lot of payment data. So Microsoft Azure has leveraged on various features to maintain their PCI DSS certification, and this is evidenced even on their website. So in these cases, the organizations that we've discussed above have adopted both a proactive cybersecurity stance and also implemented measures beyond the mere compliance requirements and the overall security. This means they are leveraging on encryption, ensuring access controls is properly regulated, performing a lot of testing on their environments and on their infrastructure, and continually trying to adapt their cybersecurity best practices, which now counter against the evolving threats in the compliance standards. So some of the best practices that these top companies have adopted is to ensure continuous risk assessment, building security by design into any of your application, running a lot of vulnerability scans, automated vulnerability scans, and this is a specific requirement of PCI 3.2.1 version 6 or requirement number 6. Ensuring encryption is implemented across the board. So this is for both data in transit and also data at rest, which includes encrypting cardholder data, sensitive authentication data, and also securing all the key management practices, basically the secure key, the primary key. There is security awareness training. All these companies provide regular security awareness training to employees and also to their customers to educate them about the security practices and their role in safeguarding sensitive information. A lot of banks always have adverts that say, even M-Pesa, for those who are joining us from Kenya, is do not disclose your PIN. Do not, indeed, none of the staff at that particular company will ever call you and ask you for your PIN. So if someone approaches or someone who's trying to become a malicious actor, ask for your PIN, no matter what, you should never disclose that online. And that training only comes from both your service provider and also from the general public, and by sharing a lot of information across platforms. You need to ensure that you conduct regular system audits, and this is a requirement as number 4. Under third-party risk management, if you're using third-party vendors, you need to ensure that they also adhere to PCI DSS requirements. And you can perform regular assessment of these third-party security practices and request them for their compliance status or their certification status. You need to document all your security policies and not just have them verbally or just implemented in the system. You need to document them in physical copies and policies that can be referred to during an attack, which if it only exists in the system, it will be very impossible for you to implement or just review what needs to be done. Beyond incorporating these proactive measures into PCI and DSS compliance, it is important for you to involve a robust and adaptive security program that effectively protects cardholder data. Lucky for us, there are ready tools that we can implement to this effect. Achieving and maintaining PCI DSS compliance requires a combination of security policies, processes, and the use of specific tools and technologies. PCI software compliance is a helpful tool for any organization handling credit card data or any other types of payment card data. Most importantly, it can help even IT teams maintain compliance with PCI DSS in turn, which helps organizations avoid costly penalties, fines, which are associated with non-compliance. And in this next slide, we will look at now some of the key tools and technologies that organizations commonly leverage to support PCI compliance. First is implementing firewalls. Not only just implementing firewalls, is implementing strong firewall policies. Example of firewalls are like Cisco, Checkpoint, VFSense, so forth. And PCI requirement number 2, or the principle number 2, is you ensure you don't use the default passwords. So you need to also implement new accounts with non-default passwords. There's also the implementation of intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, basically IDSs and IPSs. Examples such as Cisco Firepower for Cisco ASA firewalls. And then there are third-party tools such as Snort, which ideally monitor networks even when you're not on your workstation to prevent unauthorized access, especially to cardholder data. There's tools that are file integrity monitoring tools, such as OSAC, and there's also ID and Tripwire. So such tools they monitor changes to critical system files. So the critical files which are stored in the registry, which can be easily altered by an attacker to give them backend access. Such a tool would restrict them and would also alert you that various backend protocols have been edited or have been changed, or the integrity of a registry entry has been changed. You can implement vulnerability scanners such as OpenVAS and Qualsys, which are free to download, and some of them have also an extended trial period. And these are basically tools which are continuously scanning your network for unwanted traffic and also for any vulnerabilities. We have tokenization tools specific to PCI compliance, such as voltage secure data, Cipher Trust, and you will see this in some of the logos when you're making payments on various platforms such as Netflix or even the Nairobi Expressway. If you have connected that to your card or to your bank, you'd see a logo at the top right, or around the top left actually, with Cipher Trust tokenization. So these tokenization tools basically replace all the sensitive data that you've stored through the transaction and pseudomize that data. Once the transaction is complete, it then reloads back using the original token ID, your actual details. So if someone was to sniff that transaction or have a man in the middle attack, they would get pseudomized information, but both the merchant and you as the customer would be able to complete the transaction. There's also the implementation of SSL and TLS levels on your networks. And this is ensuring that you have a valid SSL, especially if you're using online platforms, and not the free SSL certificates that are being issued. You can also have a security incident and security information event management system, what is called a CM. And this is a system that basically, or a tool that can help you analyze and correlate security events. So a CM would look at, if let's say you're a merchant and another merchant has been attacked in a similar fashion. If you have a CM implemented within your network or within your environment, it has already studied what happened to another customer or to another person anywhere around the world, and then it automatically prevents such an occurrence happening again, especially if a hacker only has a one-way of trying to gain access to systems. You can also implement a web application firewall, which basically is a firewall, not only a physical firewall, which now tracks physical traffic on AWS and on Microsoft Azure, because these are cloud-based platforms. You then need to implement web application firewalls, especially for your applications that you're running on security on the cloud. As I had mentioned earlier, the security of the cloud is managed by the provider, but the security in the cloud is your responsibility. because you can't walk to Amazon and ask them to install a firewall on physical server, and the web access firewalls and the web app firewalls come into play. It's important for organizations to carefully select and implement the right tools, because the various requirements of PCI DSS require a lot of regular monitoring, having automated updates, and also maintaining a secure and compliant environment. Organizations often work with quality security and safety assessors to assess and validate the compliance status, and they always have to look at the tools that have been implemented to this effect. There are various steps to achieve PCI compliance. Step one is to identify and scope the organization's PCI DSS compliance regulations. And in this case, you need to assess all the cardholder data and the cardholder environment. Number two is to implement appropriate security controls, tools, and practices to protect the payment card data against any vulnerabilities or threats. Step three is to ensure now that you test and monitor your systems on a regular basis. And step four is now to conduct the PCI DSS assessment based on the self-assessment questionnaires A, CVT, P, depending on the level of either a service provider or as a merchant. It's important to note that the specific steps and activities that may actually vary based on an organization's size, the complexity of its infrastructure, and the specific requirements applicable to PCI. Additionally, compliance is an ongoing process, and the organizations must continually monitor and improve their security posture to maintain PCI DSS compliance. So one of the key threats that Joseph alluded to is that most organizations certify themselves within the first year and they never go back for recertification. So regular assessments and updates are critical to addressing any new vulnerabilities and adapting to the changes, especially in this new internet age and within the 5G internet age now that we're stepping into. Unlike in 2006, when it was still on the edge network, where the bandwidth was more or less 1 MB per second. With 5G, it is upwards of a gigabyte per second. So the throughput of data now requires us to secure it even more, because within 2 seconds or 10 seconds, all the data that you're trying to safeguard can be compromised. I'd like to end the webinar here, and I'd like to hand over back to Meha to run through some of the questions that have been running in the chat and address some of the question and answer session.
Thank you, Paul. Before we transition into the Q&A session, I want to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished panelists, Paul Macharia, Joseph Monzonje, and Sandeep, for their insightful presentation on proactive cybersecurity management with a focus on payment card industry compliance. So now let's open the floor for your questions. We had a few questions in the chat. So the first question was, if I was looking at pursuing PCI DSS compliance this year in 2024, which version should I look at implementing? Version 3.2.1 or version 4.1? Paul, you can take this question, please. Thank you.
Right. So it is 3.2.1 comes to expiry in March of 2024. So if you're certifying yourself or if you're running a compliance test before then you can only use the 3.2.1 standard. However, if you then are planning on certifying yourself post-March, once the 3.2.1 is fully decommissioned, then you will be running it for only a year, within March 2024 to March 2025. In March 2025, it will be fully retired. So it is best to adopt the current standard, which is the 4.0, instead of going to the most recent standard. Also, 4.0 has addressed higher levels, higher thresholds of risk. compared to 3.2.1. A similar example is ISO 27001. So most organizations are currently holding a certification that is 2013.2013, ISO 27001.2013. In 2022, there were new policies and procedures that were issued as part of ISO 27001, but the revised 2022 edition, which takes into account remote working, which was not there in 2013. It takes into account the work from home culture, the work from anywhere, takes into account a lot of cloud systems, which were not taken into account in 2013 because the adoption of cloud had not hit the mark that it has currently in 2020 or in 2022. So it's important to implement 4.0. You'd rather wait till March, then implement 4.0, than implement 3.2, run it for a year, and then after you implement 4.0.
Thank you, Paul. The next question is, what is the validity period once you're determined at compliant by a QSA?
Straight up, 52 weeks, a calendar, one calendar. Then thereafter, you need to recertify if you're going for the certification route. Also, you have to perform an annual vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, which have to be done by a QSA, basically a third party, or an appointed QSA, basically by the PSI, that holds a certain level of certification, which has a baseline criteria, which now views your environment against a specific set of controls within PAPT. So it's
Thank you. The next question is, PCI DSSS tends to focus on payment cards for major card schemes, Visa, MasterCard. How about other card types such as loyalty cards, parking cards, or any other holds individual data?
right.
Meha, the question continues on the next one as well.
Sorry, what?
The question, the user Roya Kala, yeah, I think he completed his question on the next one. So just read
yes.
the last two lines.
Yes, thank you for confirming that. So how about other card types such as loyalty cards, parking cards, or any that hold individual data? Are there other standards or aspects of PCI DSSS that can be applied to this category?
Right, so I'll merge those two questions into one. So as at 2006, the first 4 companies that formed the PCI Council were Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and the last one was American Express. Consequently, between 2006 and 2024, a lot of the companies have now joined the PCI SC, which is the Security Council. So almost all card providers outside some of the EU revisions that were done after the implementation of GDPR, as well as some of the Russian companies who are done sanctioned after the Ukraine war to track AML and CFT, especially within those regions. All other banks across the globe and they are all compliant, and about 90% of all cards that have been issued globally are either Visa or MasterCard. Then the second question on the loyalty card points, I'd want to understand it further. Is it outside now the debit and credit cards, and then these are more loyalty cards? Now, if you could just revisit the entire question in full.
Yes, he said yes.
All right, so pin and chip came in as PCI 3.2, the short-term version, because in between 2011 and 2013, there was a lot of card scheming fraud, basically, where they take a copy of your strip. So pin and chip became now the new adopted standard. Then This is on the physical card itself as per PCI DSS requirements. So between 2016 and 2018, most banks moved away from the original just strip card and now fully adopted pin and chip. I'll give an example of Naivas and other supermarkets. They issue you with a loyalty card, which is also a pin and chip card. In that particular card, it is cardholder information, especially there's your telephone number, there's probably your ID, and then your full name as it was registered as per your ID. Then merged with someone who has no access to your bank account card, maybe your card that has been issued by a Visa or a MasterCard merchant. Then it is very easy for that person to then merge the information and perform fraud. But as individual cards, especially this one that does not have any CVV or even the full print card number at the bottom, it now relates to bank or a financial institution. And that does not fall under PCI DSS. That the security on that would then look at something like COVID or even NIST, the moderate baseline.
Thank you, Paul, for your answer. I think that's all the questions we have. We can move on to talking about the next few webinars for this series. So the next webinar will be part 3, which will be the intersection of e-discovery and cybersecurity, followed by part 4, which is how does cloud ERP drive business growth? And the last one, which will be on 9th May, will be part 5, and it will cover the executive overview, improving cybersecurity costs effectively. And as I mentioned earlier, all the recordings of the previous webinars in this series are going to be available on YouTube, so you can catch up if you missed the first one. And Paul, please move to the next slide. Thank you. So the data protection 5-part series launch will cover the role of data protection officers, DPOs in East Africa, data protection compliance, the journey so far, data protection for small and medium enterprises, SMEs, emerging technologies in data protection, and cross-border data transfers, challenges and solutions. So you can see the timeline of the different series we have. So please look out for an email in your inbox for the registration link for the next few webinars as they come. And I'd also like to talk about the next webinar, which is next week, which is on it's on fraud files unsealed, and it's about dissecting real fraud cases, investigations, outcomes, and mitigation strategies. So the registration link will also be sent out for that, and we hope to see you all next week, and thank you for joining us. So as you can see, this is the BDO Cybersecurity Consulting portfolio. There are several different units that are available at BDO in East Africa, so you can take a look, and we hope to be of service for you. Thank you so much.